affairs. Facts and opinion. Their future in our hands. Markets. Globalist technocrats versus the people. A line in the sand. The McIntyre Report.
And welcome, folks, back to the McIntyre Report, independent media here, Australian National Review. For our 24-hour news, headlines, ANR.news. So much is happening in the world. 2026. We expected it to be a big year. We did predict that the likelihood of World War III in 2026-27, I put up as high as 50% chance. We're certainly looking that way, with them trying to obviously start war with Iran, which has been predicted to happen ever since. So General Wesley Clark was told after September 11th, when he was called to the Pentagon, 7 wars in 5 years. 7 wars in 5 years. He said, what do you mean 7 wars in 5 years? Well, we're going to use this moment to 7 wars in 5 years. And Iran was the last of those wars. We've seen Iraq was attacked and blamed even for September 11th. They had nothing to do with it. We've seen Afghanistan. We've seen Yemen attacked. We've seen Lebanon. We've seen Syria. Syria was meant to fall straight after September 11th, but Assad was able to hold off for some time. But eventually the Assad regime fell, or shouldn't say regime, Assad government. But of course, anyone that opposes this warmongering machine is called an evil dictator or regime. And they are able to, the West is led by, we know, a certain nation in the Middle East. People think America runs the West, but many are finding out that that's not actually true. Who controls American foreign policy, and who are the warmongers? Who is wanting war with Russia, China, Iran, and now Greenland and Venezuela? What a world we live in. Today, we're going to talk about a little bit about Iran, but also we're going to touch on hate speech laws introduced into Australia, following exactly the same path of the UK, and hate speech laws for the rest of the West is coming. How we're able to predict this would be a likely thing to occur in Australia, particularly after the Bondi massacre. Who benefits from these? Do Australians benefit from these hate speech laws? Is it really about hate speech? Or is it really about protecting a certain group of people that have an agenda that more and more people are finding out about? I'm glad to be joined today on the McIntyre Report for the very first time. Syrian Girl, we love to have you on the show. Obviously, you have a big following. You're very outspoken, independent journalist that likes to speak the truth and doesn't hold back. You were recently in Iran. Tell us a little bit about Iran. What's going on there? Is it as the Western media portrays, or are we being deeply misled if we follow mainstream media?
Thank you so much for having me on. Basically, I was in Iran as my other job as a scientist. There was a conference for science. It was called the Mustafa Prize, essentially like the Nobel Prize, but Iran is running it and Iran is giving the prize. Obviously, I didn't win. I was just there as a scientist to cover the whole event, and I'm posting, gradually everything that I saw over there. But what I did see was immediately as I was going onto the plane, I basically organized to have some modest clothing. But as soon as I got onto the plane, there was a girl waiting to board the plane with a midriff on. And I was thinking, oh, I have completely misjudged the situation. And upon arrival, I found that women were not covering their hair. I thought it was compulsory, but that wasn't the case, that a lot of women were showing their hair. And eventually I also became one of them. So I think you'll probably have some clips to show alongside this. So I think there's a lot of propaganda that we are being, subjected to when it comes to Iran. There's this notion that the US wants to bomb Iran and Israel wants to bomb Iran to save the women. But one of the things that we saw in the Science Award is that the number of female graduates from science and STEM have actually exceeded the number of boys doing so. There was a discussion about how they're going to encourage boys to get into STEM. So I think that the sciences, the jobs that women can have there, the fact that they can't show their hair, it just shows you that they don't have this narrative that we're being sold, save Iranian women, freedom for women, and let's bomb Iran for freedom. It is just another bullshit story, like we got in Syria, like we got in Iraq, like we got in Libya, for regime change, and that regime change is for the benefit of Israel, and it's in order to create chaos in the country and create civil war and lead to a lot of death. And if anything, if you ask them what are women lacking, probably they will tell you that they want to bring in the OnlyFans market. They want to open the Iranian women to the OnlyFans market, right? Like that's what's the war is about.
That's certainly interesting.
For OnlyFans.
Well, maybe Israel should be happy with that and don't bomb them. We're going to make money out of OnlyFans. Let's take a look at some of this footage so people can see for themselves, and then we'll talk about it.
Hi everyone, this is Syrian Girl, and I'm shopping in Iran's capital, Tehran, with a beautiful Iranian guide, just to show how much propaganda there is about women's life here to promote regime change. So hop in, friends, we're going shopping. We're in Iran. It's really cool. Let's go to the store that has music. Yeah. I love music. Yeah, is it this one? Yeah.
I've been working on myself. I really try my best to change, but sometimes in a love will fade. Right? Maybe we should stay in bed, pretend that everything's the same, just a little play pretend.
What do you think of this shopping center? It's kind of... Is it the best one? No. Really? It's not. It's a bit busy. Not the best, but it's cheap. It's a cheap bazaar store. So now we're going back out. We're going to go to one of the oldest bazaars ever. Yeah. So this is a perfumery just outside the mall, and he can mix you up any scent you want, and he'll even dupe famous scents for you. So I think the name of the store is Scent Ral. Get it? Scent Ral. And the owner is also very nice. Now we go to Tehran's Grand Bazaar, which is 450 years old, which makes this shopping center more than 5.5 times older than the terror state of Israel. What will you find at the bazaar? Everything. But they say Iran is blessed with 3 golds: pistachios, caviar, and saffron. See, the Zionists are lying to you about Iran and about the women in Iran because they want to manufacture consent for regime change. They want to bomb and destroy the lives of these happy people for daring to oppose Israel's genocide of Palestinians. This concludes my shopping blog, so thank you for coming along with me, and long live Iran, down with Israel.
Well, that's very interesting because people don't really get to see that. And most people probably, of course, haven't been to Iran. I haven't myself. I would love to go. But this is a nation that's been sanctioned to death by the West. And those who know independent critical thinkers know that the West is led by the state of Israel. And they've sanctioned this nation. But despite that, just like they sanctioned Russia and Venezuela, etc., Iran seems to be doing remarkably well for a sanctioned nation.
Well, one of the other things that I did that would concern Australia is I went to a synagogue and I discussed, if you recall, there was a incident where an anti-Zionist synagogue had some kind of arson attack, and they blamed Iran. And the way that they blamed Iran was they got ASIO to say that somebody connected to somebody, connected to somebody, connected to somebody, connected to somebody like somehow it was Iran. And this was right after Australia had, declared Palestine a state. So there was a lot of internal kvetching, shall we say, against that by the Zionist lobby. And so they came up with this accusation. And so I went to synagogues that are actually inside Iran, of which there are many in Tehran. And I interviewed one of the rabbis saying, like, do you think this could have possibly ever happened, that Iran would be behind setting fire to a synagogue in Australia? And not to mention the only anti-Zionist synagogue that there is in Sydney. And yeah, he said, impossible. It's impossible. He said, like, our lives are fine here, like, we're perfectly safe. He even thanked the Iranian government. I actually told him, like, if you don't want to answer anything, please be my guest. We'll stop the video right here. And he went on to answer. So it just goes to show you that we are being propagandized, and we have been infiltrated. We're supposed to have security with these agencies that are, spying on Australian citizens to try to prevent a terror attack. Meanwhile, they're busy, like, blaming Iran, while ISIS was preparing a terrorist attack in Bondi. Sorry, I don't know if there was any issue with the sound there.
We did hear it. You did say ISIS was preparing an attack in Bondi. I just want to touch on that, because after Bondi Massacre, I mean, we did some research, Australian National Review, like 18 months ago. We wanted to find out who was behind the Bali bombings. When we investigated who was behind the Bali bombings, we said, is it possible that Mossad, which is behind most, false flag attacks, is it possible Mossad was behind Bali bombings? What we did find is that, yes, they were. But what we weren't expecting is that the same operatives used by Mossad, were apparently behind Port Arthur massacre. We didn't expect that. We weren't looking for that connection. So what I want to ask the question is this, is because the Bondi massacre, I mean, Netanyahu come out immediately, like they seem to always do, like almost prepared speech, and utilize the Bondi massacre for Israel's political objectives. And we said they will move out more guns. So how many more guns? There's not many guns left to remove after they did Port Arthur, and they will introduce hate speech laws, stricter anti-Semitism laws, etc. Now, Iran come out and said the most likely suspect for the Bondi massacre was actually Israel, not Iran. Israel blamed Iran, but what the hell would Iran bother on the other side of the world attacking Australians on a beach when they're busy defending their own nation or living their own lives, and they have no motive, no prior history of doing such attacks, and no real capability? Yet Israel or Mossad has, reportedly done 95% of false flag attacks, has motive, has capability, has a very strong past history. Now, I'm not saying they were behind the Bondi massacre. I'm just saying, in a murder investigation, wouldn't you look at who has motive and past pattern of history doing such things and capability? That's what investigation should be. But we haven't seen any of that investigation in Australia. So do you think do you see any reason Iran would want to shoot Australians on a Bondi beach?
No, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous notion. And the fact of the matter is, like, the guys that they were arrested, they're these Indian men that are part of, I think, the Wahhabi school of Islam. So they hate Shia Muslims. So they would hate Iran. Like, ISIS wants to kill Iran, which, kind of suits Israel, because essentially, like, Israel and hates Iran, and so does ISIS. They share the same enemy. So I know after Bondi, there was an immediate accusation by the Zionist lobby against Iran. But now that's kind of gone away. That's kind of like disappeared into the ether. We don't remember them making that assertion because it became obvious that these Wahhabis, Salafi types, they hate Iran. They're the ISIS, Al-Qaeda types. And so Iran retaliated in kind with its own accusations against Israel. I think it's clear who benefits. You know, it's not Iran. Like Israel is benefiting in that it can extend its influence deeper inside Australia and silence opposition to its influence. And that's exactly what these hate speech laws is about. Now, whether or not it is like some kind of inside job or false flag, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, like, the fact of the matter is Israel committed a genocide, and there's going to be a lot of people who hate Israel for that. And that Bondi event that they were holding, a lot of the organizers were Israeli from Chabad. And that rabbi that was killed, I think his name is Rabbi Schlanger, he actually, called for my death on social media from Israel. He called me Amalek. So there is, the question of whether or not it's a false flag. I think that at the end of the day, Israel has brought its wars to Australia's shores. And now it's bringing its laws into Australia's, Israel is cracking down on Australia, through this notion of the Jewish lobby in Australia, but really it's Israel. And I think we can get into that quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. And I think even a lot of good Jewish people are speaking out and are very anti-Israel. I mean, people forget that there's no reason that you're Jewish, you have to stand with Netanyahu and dropping bombs on children. As we just saw on the screen, they'll show it again. I mean, they claim there's no genocide. I don't know what else you would call that. And the amount of deaths is much higher than obviously what would be listed, because how many people or babies are buried under the rubble? I mean, at least if you're going to do a genocide, don't be deniers of it. At least come clean and say, yeah, we are. We actually want to take Gaza, and we erect prison fences around their land and bomb the crap out of them, and then claim that we have a right to self-defense. I mean, I think, and then anyone that dare criticizes that evil satanic act we're somehow the problem. So these hate speech laws are going to be not to lock up Netanyahu and war criminals, but to lock up us that notice that that's bad human behavior, that's not acceptable, shouldn't be tolerated. So the issue clearly is that hate speech laws, as you say, don't benefit Iran, but who do they benefit? Let's take a look at what Senator Alex Antic had to say.
Well, this afternoon, the Senate's going to vote on this so-called compromise bill that's been introduced, the Combating Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremism Bill. It's perhaps known as the Hate Speech or Hate Groups Bill now. This is now a completely separate piece of legislative work to the Firearms Bill, which is a bill which is going to make unnecessary changes to our firearms laws. I oppose both in their entirety, and I'm going to be crossing the floor, it looks like, to vote against the Hate Groups Bill as well. We don't really need any more laws in this country. Many of you will agree with that, I'm sure. We actually need a lot less. And there are so many issues with these bills that I really don't have time now to list them all. But the main issue really is with the Hate Groups Bill. And the main issue with that is that it creates a framework for groups to be listed as prohibited hate groups, which means that the minister can specify these groups as hate groups following a recommendation from the ASIO Director General. Now, yes, there is a checklist of requirements in the Act, for which a designation relies on. But who's to say that future political parties or groups engaged in legitimate political discourse won't fall afoul of that and be designated as hate groups in the years to come? No procedural fairness is in this as well. So designation is just as it is, and it triggers consequential changes to surveillance laws, interception laws, and citizenship laws, even in parts of the bill. The bill has a range of issues. I mean, it's just too many, but the chilling effect on free speech and religious expression is one. It's very vague. The terminology is vague. There are broad definitions. Terms like hate speech and hate crime and hate group, they're all very broad. There's a lack of safeguards, as I said, for due process, and overarchingly an impact on political free speech, discourse and association. And if the bill passes, it expands the state coercive powers really in a way that risks eroding core freedoms under the guise of protecting us against hate. It makes no sense. And make no mistake, this is a genuinely serious brick removed from the wall of freedom in Australia if it passes. The big winners today will be the security state, the security apparatus, not everyday Australians who are going to soon see that they'll be even less free than they were a few days ago if this bill passes.
Well, there you heard from Senator Antic, and I would have to agree with him. The intelligence apparatus, which we know who controls the intelligence apparatus, who controls the CIA, most the Five Eyes, it all goes back to Mossad, which is Israel. Let me ask you a question very simply. I mean, the way it looks is how much hate does it take to drop bombs on children? That's hate. So hate speech laws are really to stop those, not stop those dropping bombs on children. It's to stop those highlighting the hate that people must have to drop bombs on children. What's your thoughts?
Well, indeed. The thing that we're not allowed to say is that the genocide in Gaza is the cause of an increase of hatred against Israel, right? Like, we're not allowed to say that because we're supposed to think that such an idea comes from air. And it's just inherent into people, like this hatred is inherent in people. And these new laws seek to criminalize offending nationalities. So it's not so much like even specifically against offending a race of people, but you can even just offend their nationality. So it becomes also about Israel, because you can argue Israel isn't a race. But there's one thing I want to point out. I have two things to point out. First of all, I have two articles here. I've sent it to you in the chat if you want to bring it up. But hidden in the fine print, in the days subsequent to the Bondi attack, there was two articles that said, when the risk of anti-Semitic attacks increased after the October 7th massacre in Israel, the former official said that ASIO likely focused on individuals linked with pro-Palestine organizations rather than the Islamic State. So these are like a criticism of ASIO for basically being redirected to put all of their efforts in policing pro-Palestine organizations and spying on them and people that attend protests, and just ignoring ISIS. Now, who would be responsible for that if not for Israel, or the Jewish lobby influence to try to focus on the pro-Palestine rallies rather than ISIS? Another article here on the news.com, ASIO is facing growing questions in the wake of the Bondi terror attack. Amid new revelations, Australia's spy agency had in recent years shifted its focus away from tracking Islamic State sympathizers. It instead focused on countering foreign interference from countries like China, Russia, Iran, and India, and monitoring right-wing extremists and pro-Palestine activists. So essentially, their mistake was focusing their energy not on Islamic State or ISIS, but on all of these other groups like right-wing protests, like Joel Davis and NSN, and the anti-immigration rallies, and pro-Palestine rallies. That was their focus. Now, that bit of criticism has been washed away with a deluge of propaganda, refocusing right back onto the pro-Palestine protests and the NSN, right? Instead of fixing the problem and addressing the problem of the fact that ASIO was focusing on the wrong thing, now we're all demanded to blame pro-Palestine protests and the right-wing NSN white nationalist protests. And they're trying to ban these things, essentially. The Premier of New South Wales shut down holding protests. Now he extended that, even though everybody ignored him anyway. But he's done that to appease the Zionists. The Zionists don't care about whether or not there's terrorist attacks in Australia. They care about Israel not being criticized. And I think the head of the Australian Jewish Association, I think it was, the AJAC, Australian something. What was it? What does it stand for, AJAC? I forget.
I think Australian Jewish something. I can show. There's a video here we can show.
Australia, Israel, and Jewish Affairs Council. Yes, please show the video where they admit.
Yeah.
No more protests. No more protests. Now, these things are very clear. Upgrades to security. Jewish community shouldn't have to be paying for it. The 25 million they gave to us, you can't use that for armed guards. Only physical structures, they said. We have to pay for our own armed guards? Are you serious? They should be appropriating and saying for the next 5 to 10 years, all your synagogues, all your shuls, all paid for. Everything that you need is paid for. Right? If you guys want armed police cars, if you want police cars out there just for visuals, I just sent my daughter to a Jewish kinder yesterday and there were no police cars out there. And think about what I'm just saying to you. I'm saying I want the police car there. This is the society that we live in, where I'm actually asking for a physical police presence to protect my 5-year-old daughter from harm. This is where we've got. And he still, and his colleagues still, cannot grapple with the gravity of the problem. They need to act swiftly. They need to go to their own arms and their own institutions. No longer can you refuse service to a Zionist. We are going to prosecute people that spew hate speech against your people, and we're not going to tiptoe around the fact that the central problem here is Israel. I, for one, as a Jewish leader, will no longer talk about anti-Semitism in isolation from Israel, because it's the rhetoric and language on Israel that motivates the people to come and kill us. Those two terrorists were motivated by what was going on in Israel, what motivated them to come and kill us. So if they had Israel on their minds, why are we acting as though that it has nothing to do with the vitriolic binary nature of the pro-Palestinian advocacy movement? So overnight, what we want immediately, if you ask any Jew, what do you want? What do you want? No more protests. No more protests. No more no-go zones for Jews. I can't, for 2 years, cannot take my kids to downtown Melbourne for 2 years on a Sunday because of the pro-Palestinian marches, because of the violent nature of them. No more. Because that is an acceptance of the connection between the two. And until the Prime Minister is willing to do that, this is going to happen again.
And I know, Joel, we hear your frustration.
It's interesting, like, how about we just collectively as a group of people say, stop dropping bombs on children, and then anti-Semitism would dramatically reduce. It increases with the ratio of dropping bombs on children. I think any adult can figure that out. So unless that's addressed, I mean, actually, in fact, we can look at it this way. The rise in so-called anti-Semitism is good for humanity. It's not a bad thing, because it means humanity has human compassion and cares about people on the other side of the world being genocided and bombed to death. If they didn't, and we didn't see a rise in so-called anti-Semitism, that's when we should be worried. So the rise in Zionism is probably the cancer in society. And in Australia, I'm really appalled by how few people, I'm not say a few, a lot of people oppose this, but they seem to get confused. And even people in the freedom movement that are meant to be awake go, I stand with Israel. I mean, you stand with a state bombing children. How do you explain that to your children or grandchildren? How do people figure this out? I just don't get it.
I mean, I guess my reaction is, to his speech is, have you ever tried not committing a genocide? I mean, that is an option. But I do reject the notion that the protests somehow had anything to do with Bondi, because the protests were a reaction to the genocide, okay? And Bondi, separately to that, because the men that committed Bondi, they never attended any of the protests, okay? In fact, there was a fatwa issued in Sydney against attending protests by these Wahhabi Muslims because they feared that they would intermix between women and men. That was an excuse. The real reason was they were upset that their flags were banned by the protest organizers. The Shaheed flags, they were banned by the organizers, and ISIS flags. So they came up with it will be mixing between men and women to stop their people from attending the rallies. So they weren't attending the rallies, okay? It's got nothing to do with the rallies. The rallies were a reaction to the genocide, and the increase of hatred is a result of the genocide. So ISIS, of course, this is probably the first time they've attacked anything related to Israel, even if in the fact that some of the individuals that were attending there were linked to Israel. Most of the time, like, I think the only other time ISIS attacked Israel, they actually apologized, and Israel noted that they apologized. And because most of the time, ISIS is attacking Israel's enemies, like Iran and Syria. The thing is that it's a crock, essentially, to try to lay the blame on any protests, whether they be right wing or left wing. People who protest, whether they really believe it or not, they are sort of somehow in their minds think that they live in a democracy, which is quickly being eroded, right? And people who think that they live in a democracy and they want to protest, they're not going to pick up a gun and take up arms against the state, right? Like, people who want to pick up guns have given up on the notion of protesting, obviously. So it's completely unrelated, and Australians have the right to protest, whether that be a right-wing protest or a left-wing protest. And people in the freedom movement, they need to remember how they were betrayed and their right to protest was crushed. And they need to defend the right to protest, even if it is a protest that they don't necessarily agree with. Australians should have the right to protest, and we in the freedom movement need to defend that. Furthermore, those in the freedom movement who say they support Israel, I mean, did they not know that the CEO of Pfizer, who created the vaccine, was given an award by Israel and is entitled to Israeli citizenship? I mean, did they know that BlackRock sends most of its money to Israel? It is a bit of a delusion. And if I may add to the criticism, what I'm observing is a lot of the rhetoric from the freedom movement and its offshoots, I would say, like the anti-immigration movements, and people like Craig Kelly, for example. The rhetoric they use against this bill is helpful to the Zionist lobby. They'll say something along the lines of, this bill doesn't go hard enough against hate preachers, and that's why we're against it. Like, they're almost against it because it doesn't suppress speech enough, and they want to include suppression of religious texts. Now, the problem with that is, like, the notion is, the target is that this is about Islam. We have to silence Islam. But if you read the Bible, that too could be considered hate preaching if you read certain parts of the Bible that are against Judaism, right? So by trying to extend the hate speech laws to religious texts, they are not only shooting like Islam in the foot, they're also shooting Christianity in the foot. And I wonder if the Old Testament, the fact that the Old Testament has so much genocidal rhetoric in it against Amalek, which, apparently I'm Amalek according to that rabbi, and so are the Palestinians, like, would that not also be banned? It's probably one of the reasons why they haven't included the religious text. But Sky News will go on and on about it as if that's the only reason that we should oppose the law, is that it doesn't go hard enough. Another thing is that, whenever I see, like, I understand that obviously the people who committed the Bondi attacks, I'm sorry, like, is the audio okay? I think
Audio is good, yeah.
Yeah, good. Sorry, my headphones have an issue. The people that committed the Bondi attacks were obviously these extremist Wahhabi ISIS terrorists, and that is understood. They were allowing them to preach these things. They to have like these schools essentially in Sydney, but the fact is that what I observe from the freedom movement and its, some of its mouthpieces, like its advocates, is that they are still afraid to name who is responsible for these laws, right? They want to punch down and say, oh, it's the Muslims, it's immigration. Well,
just on that, Syrian Girl, this is what I wanted to raise, because the other question is, yes, who wrote these laws? which state, foreign actors, states wrote these laws. These are not just random laws. I mean, obviously UK, you see they're pushing them, they'll push them around the West. They were predicted to be coming. How did we know at independent media that this is what we expect the reaction to be? So who was behind that? And many people can soon start to connect the dots who's behind it. If it's just a conspiracy theory that Israel has any involvement in the lobbying of these laws or the creation of these laws in Australia, why don't they just be able to stop that in its tracks and go, okay, we will make sure that you're allowed to still have free speech and legitimately criticize a genocide no matter what nation commits a genocide. I have Scottish background, so if Scotland started bombing Gaza, am I anti-Scottish to criticize Scotland for bombing children to death? I'm clearly not. Or anti-English if it was England. No, it's an absolute nonsense. So the point B, they should make it very clear then. Let's cut the conspiracy theory. It's not done by Israel. It's not for their benefit. It's not from their lobbying. Therefore, we're going to put a clause in it that anyone can exercise free speech and criticize any nation, including Israel, if it drops bombs on children. Why don't they just do that? But clearly they're not.
And it's not just that. I mean, the focus on the right-wing marches as well. I think it's clear that is like what Israel and the Zionist lobby see as the biggest threat in this country is the loss of control over the Anglo-Saxon people, right? And the fact that like the anti-immigration marches have not allowed the Zionist infiltration to basically take over the rallies, and you had the anti immigration and Joel Davis, the NSN rallies. Joel Davis is now in prison. They see him as the biggest threat because he might actually convince the Anglo-Australian sphere that being subservient to Israel is not in your interests. Because in fact, one of the biggest advocates of immigration in this country and one of the biggest pushers of immigration, ironically, was John Howard. And, what was his name? Frank Lowy from the Lowy Institute pushed John Howard into bringing in more and more immigrants. But what they are saying now, that they're portraying, like Andrew Hastie portrayed these laws as anti-immigration laws. But what they're actually going to try to do is increase immigration from countries that Israel likes, like India, and try to limit any critics of Israel in order to maintain the power of the Zionist lobby. Because it's going to be harder to convince the Anglo masses of the fact that they are under occupation by a foreign power, the Zionist Israeli power. But immigrants are probably more from certain countries are probably more clued up on it. India, however, not so, because they are in an alliance essentially with Israel, and that's why people like Pauline Hanson attend Sikh temples and promote Indian immigration, because they're owned by the Zionist lobby, and not just them, of course, the Liberal Party as well. So I think when going back, I am a bit disappointed with some of the voices in the freedom movement, because this is the perfect opportunity to wake up the world to who's actually running the show. And rather than that, they're adopting Zionist talking points like this law doesn't protect against hate preachers, and another thing, the law, and I'm sorry, I know this, I'm going long, but this is the last point, I promise. The laws protect, it's the anti-Semitism and hate speech laws, okay? They protect race, nationality, and ethno-religions, okay? So only Judaism and Sikhs would be covered under this law. So there have been politicians that have pushed for it to include all religions. These have been people like Anne Ali, they've been people like the Greens. They're saying we don't want to be second-class citizens. If there's going to be hate speech laws, they should protect all religions, okay? So, because currently, under Section 18C of the Hate Speech Law Act, it is just Jews that are protected, not any other religion, because it's seen as an ethno-religion. we can argue about whether Judaism is an ethnicity or not. Unfortunately, under Australian law, in spite of all evidence to the contrary, it is considered as such. And therefore, like, if you were to be discriminated against for being anything else, like even I, like as a Syrian, I was stalked for 8 years by a guy who was harassing Syrians, and I talked to the police. I'm like, well, under these hate speech laws, supposedly, this kind of behavior is unacceptable. And they were saying, well, Syrians, are they a race or aren't they a race? So, like, obviously, they have the people who are benefiting from these laws are not us, okay? They are a particular group of people who have already like declared themselves a race. And they will not allow the laws. If we're gonna have hate speech laws, if we have to have hate speech laws, right? Then can't we all be equal under the law? Or is it Christians? You can say anything you want about Christians. You can say anything you want about white people. You can say anything you want about Middle Easterners, Muslims, whatever. But you can't say anything about this select class of people. How is that fair? Like, if we have to have speech laws that crush our speech, then at the very least we should all be protected. And the thing is that those people that bring up the other religions and try to bring it in, push it in, they will actually destroy the law. Because I'm willing to put money and bet with you that if they do push for other religions to be included into this law, that the law will not pass, that the law will not be accepted, that the law will be killed, and it will be forgotten about. Because at the current state of affairs, they have privilege. I mean, we're talking about the privileged class, shall we call them, which in future we shall not be able to name, right? We're talking about the ethno-religions. They currently have privilege, and they will not allow that privilege to be taken away by the suggestion of the inclusion of other religions. However, ironically, by stating that we want to include like Islam and Christianity, you will have people on the right and people from the freedom movement counter-signaling that and saying, oh, like, we're protecting Muslims now as well as Jews, and it was Muslims that did Bondi. Like, you have to think about these things strategically. You have to think about who is the actual power in Australia, who has influence over you, who can you not criticize? And you have to focus your energy on defending yourself against that, which is taking your freedom of speech away. Otherwise, you're just feeding into their own game.
Yeah, well said. I'd have to agree. Let's take a look at this clip as well. What's happening in the...
You described Starmer as an evil, despicable man for allowing the ongoing and killing of British girls by a migrant gang.
Guilty as charged.
And you believe that because you said that, you are now banned from the country.
I really don't see any other reason as to why they otherwise would have done this right now. It's a very short, simple email, and it just said, we revoked your ETA. We consider you not conducive to the public good, and you have no right to appeal. Bye. That was it. And so I was like, what?
How far from some kind of revolution would you say European populations are?
I can't even really talk about revolution because before I know it, you would have a police officer standing in front of your door saying that you are inciting that. So I'm not, for the record. I really don't know whether we're there yet. There are still large parts of the population in Europe that is just not aware. I do think there is a big sentiment that is growing that this cannot go on the way that it has. But who knows, Tucker? I don't know if it's going to be fast enough. When we're looking at our demographic change, at a certain point, when you become totally outnumbered, you become a minority, it's going to be very difficult for us to reverse that.
Well, if you wanted to divide to conquer, it would be a very clever way to flood the West with excess Muslim immigrants from bombing excess Muslim nations. And there's only one nation that's been doing that. And to destroy the white race as well. I'm surprised at how few people see this. I mean, they're being played off. They're getting manipulated by left and right politics or immigrants. Are we picking on immigrants or, natural-born citizens? And they get caught up in this debate instead of going, who's manipulating this? Who's moving the chess pieces? Who's deliberately dividing our nations and destroying them for what is clearly a takeover?
Well, I think that the whole immigrant thing, and this girl included in this, the focus on just Islam is also playing into the Zionist hand, because the vast majority of immigrants to this country are Indian, non-Muslims, and Chinese, right? Pakistanis come after that, okay? Pakistanis, which are most of the time Muslim, come after that. But the amount from the Middle East, like from places where I'm from, is actually just like a drop in the ocean. Because if you think about it, like the number of population of Palestinians in the world, well, not in the world, in Palestine is 6 million. The number of Syrians in the world, 20 million, or not in the world, like in Syria, 20 million. The number of Indians and Pakistanis are in I think India has passed a billion. Pakistan is in the 600 billion plus. So China as well, 1 billion. So obviously, I think that the number of migrants into this country, I don't think it's necessarily a religious issue as much as it is an ethnic, cultural issue. Religion is a part of it. However, I think that the focus on trying to make it just about religion is part of a game. Okay, it's part of a game of people that say, oh, we want to bring in migrants. We love migration as long as they can assimilate, as long as they ascribe to our ideology. Then bring in, like, make Australia completely India. Then, like, that's, or make it any other, like, not to focus on Indians just because they are the largest immigrant group coming in. That's why I'm not to say there's anything against Indians themselves. I'm just saying that they will argue that by virtue of not being Muslim, these guys are okay, right? That's the argument here, which I think is suspect and should be resisted, because the agenda is clear. The agenda is to hijack the anti-immigration movement and turn it into a pro-Israel movement. Another thing about the UK, you brought up, this a girl that wasn't allowed into the UK. What about people inside the UK that are getting arrested for social media posts, right? For example, there's a Palestinian doctor called from the NHS called Dr. Rahma Al-Adwan. She's actually right-wing. And that's what makes her unique to other Palestinians, because a lot of Palestinian protests and movements have been co-opted and hijacked by the left. So she's a specific case of a Palestinian that sort of rejected the left, and she's like anti-immigration, and she said, like, the problem isn't white supremacy, it's Jewish supremacy. And as a result, she's been arrested 4 times and has had her medical license revoked. Her arrest was like 2 days ago. I think you should connect with her. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that people have to focus on who the real enemy is and forget all of our other differences, because we're all being destroyed by this. I'm looking at the Greens, for example. The Greens have passed the part of the bill that allows gun control, and they are now resisting the bill based on the fact that they know that it's going to criminalize criticism of the state of Israel. But at the same time, the Greens are happy to suppress white nationalist or right-wing groups, right? Which is unacceptable. They have no principles in that position, and clearly there's a divide and conquer strategy going on here. Likewise, Pauline Hanson is wearing an Israeli flag to parliament while she's resisting Israel's attempt to crush free speech in the country. There's a divide here. Like there's a contradiction, and I fear that without clarity, without real leadership and a clarity of thought, we will not win this war. We will not win this war, and we will be suppressed and defeated.
Yeah, I have to agree with you as well. And I think what a lot of people don't get is that they've got to understand there's left faction Zionism, which is the globalist, you'll own nothing but be happy, woke, World Economic Forum crowd, the extreme left, transgender pushing, etc. Then there's a right faction Zionism, which is Netanyahu and the fake MAGA movement, where we'll promise a revolution with Trump and it's going to drain the swamp. But all it was to drain the left faction Zionist swamp and replace it with the right faction. Let's drop bombs on children. If you're okay with that, you can join us and everything could be okay. So a lot of people on the right will support that because they have some of the things we'd agree with, but then the rest is just totally crazy, right? But people forget that they've divided by left and right, but there is another alliance. The new world order doesn't have to be left faction Zionism or right faction, run out of one world government led out of Jerusalem. There is the BRICS nations. There is Russia, Iran, China, the biggest nations part of that BRICS movement. And you look at Russia as a very big, the largest Christian nation on the planet, I believe, one of the largest nations on the planet, and very strong military power, and has been restored to, some of its former glory under the Putin leadership. And we're told to hate Putin, yet he leads a very Christian strong nation that we should be more aligned with in Australia, not hating on. And Australia ever had a nationalist leader, not a left-wing leader, not a right-wing leader, a nationalist leader that actually cared for the people. We should be part of the BRICS nations, an alliance that wants a multipolar world, not a one world government led out of Israel. So I think a lot of people have to start realizing they don't have to support left or right. That is a divide, classic divide, to keep us divided. There is another faction now, another alliance that may not be perfect, but a world that wants trade, not war, that wants a multipolar world, which I think is a great solution. And we're fortunate we have an alternative. We're fortunate we have Russia and China going, this is not acceptable. If you continue to do this, if you invade Iran, we will take action. And even Putin, even Russia being very critical of Israel, which 10 years ago you wouldn't have seen that. And obviously Russia's supportive of Assad government as much as I think they possibly could do. So there is an alternative, and I think a lot of people, do you find that a lot of people don't see that? We don't have to support a left or right, one world-led government. There is another alternative.
Unfortunately, I don't think that they see that. And I think that the left is a large part of the problem as well, because they have so hijacked the Palestinian cause and used it as a battering ram against the right in terms of the anti-migration rallies. And the Palestinian community in Australia is so small. It's like 9,000 people. So even if they wanted to lead their own movement, they just don't have the manpower to do so. But also, I think that interestingly, those socialist groups also, they hate Iran and they want revolution in Iran. So they're on the side of Israel when it comes to that. They also supported regime change in Syria. So they were on the side of Israel when it comes to that. We are in a kind of a, I would call it a, what do you call it? Like a false, non-grassroots sort of, there's a word for it, but I now forget, alas. It's controlled opposition. It's controlled opposition.
Manufactured, yes. Non-organic.
Yes. Exactly. And, people like Andrew Hastie form the other side of that controlled opposition. Because he knows, right? He surely knows. Antic, I see that he has 1984, the book behind him as he was speaking. He surely knows. I met Antic at a Liberal Party event here in Perth, and it made the Australian news. The fact that I was there and that I met him, he got interrogated for that about whether or not he supports Israel, just because I was in the same room with him. Which shows you how threatened they are about their control over the Liberal Party being, influenced. And the thing is that we have to get the people to understand. The Australian is Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is a Zionist who has been quoted as saying that he laments the fact that the Jewish-owned media isn't pro-Israel enough. That's what he said on his own Twitter account. Rupert Murdoch and his sons, it's not the Australian, it's the Israelian. I literally one time just saw all of their headlines during 2023 or 24. Every single headline in their website was about Israel. So it's not the Australian. And the fact is that all of these, like the Sydney Morning Herald, they're all Fairfax, they're all run by Murdoch. We need an awakening, and we cannot allow them to set the narrative of our speech.
Just on that side, that they're the left faction Zionists, the Sydney Morning Herald, Fairfax, etc. So they're more the Soros types, globalists.
Murdoch is right wing though. Sky News.
Murdoch is the Australian newspaper. Sydney Morning Herald was Channel 9, which was Fairfax. So they're two opposing. So you have two controlling, dominant forms of media in Australia. Right faction Zionists, which is Murdoch, as you know, which you correctly highlighted. The left faction media, and that's why you have left and right politics, because without a media platform to back the politicians, you don't get to power. Unless independent media gets strong enough and puts a nationalist leader in power, then you're not going to see that change.
But it's important to note, because this was brought up by people and it has to be corrected, the right-wing faction of the Zionists support the hate speech laws. Okay? The AJA and AJAC, they all support these hate speech laws. It is a complete and utter lie to claim that the right-wing Zionists are opposed to the hate speech laws. They're not. Second of all, the right-wing faction of Zionists promoted immigration. The Lowy Institute, Anthony Lowy, Frank Lowy, sorry, my bad. They are right-wing, and they are the biggest promoters of immigration. Thirdly, like the Israelis, they came up with a list of people in Australia who they claimed were the most dangerous delegitimizers of Israel. I ranked number 2 on that list. But I just wanted to out of 10, I think there was more than 10 after that, but I think that, isn't it interesting that a foreign country can come up with a target list of Australians that it wants to silence or more, and there's no formal government opposition to that. There's no outrage. Imagine if Iran had made a list of 10 Australians that it listed as a problem. Imagine if that had happened. Rather than defend us as Australian citizens, I have no doubt that the Australian government is going to make a target of us people on that list, right? On behalf of a foreign government. They talk to us about foreign influence of Iran, of China, of Russia. It seems to me that the foreign influence is from Israel, and it's deep entrenchment in both the government, in the security apparatus, and in the army to some extent. So
yeah, I agree.
What are we going to do about that?
You see politicians coming up. Bob Carr was one that highlighted that again and again. Kevin Rudd as well, the Israeli influence, and even Malcolm Turnbull told Netanyahu to butt out. I thought that I was really surprised there.
Mark Latham.
Yeah, Mark Latham's been a big, highlighting that, and you'll go all the way back to Gough Whitlam days, etc., when we basically had a coup, a bloodless coup in Australia. We're just about out of time. So, but just on touching that, I mean, you think of that they're always saying China's spying on us, and that's why we have to, stop TikTok. I mean, the only reason TikTok was bought for America was because Israel hated the rise of anti-Semitism on TikTok, because the younger generation are figuring out Israel and its actions. They're a bunch of wankers, a bunch of satanic Luciferians that are doing evil things, and that's good for humanity to figure that out. They could just change their behavior instead of pretending that we're the problem, So people have to understand, I don't think China gives a damn what Americans think. China has no interest in really spying. Israel is the nation that spies on everyone, and that's been highlighted and caught out in country after country. They even spy on Trump. They even spy on America. And people have to understand this is not, as you know, most people can't add up. The fake state of Israel is 77 years old. It's not biblical. And if God wanted to choose, some people to be the chosen ones here, I doubt God would choose the Rothschilds, banker, wanker, banking cartel state. I mean, they don't even believe in God. I think God would come up with better role models to represent him here. So it's absurd for us to be told that we must stand with Israel because we're Christians, or absurd that they're biblical and God chose them. I mean, it's just utter childish nonsense that a 5-year-old can debunk. But it's time adults stop being fully matured adults, actually grow up a little bit. So thank you for your time today, Syrian Girl. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate that there's a voice, special female voices that stand up, and you have something that we need more men to have in this world.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. I hope to be here again soon. And thank you for your bravery too.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon. There you have Syrian Girl, very outspoken. She was on Alex Jones just recently as well. That's all for this episode, folks. We'll be back next week with some more. Stay tuned.
Opportunities like this don't appear when a destination is already famous. Introducing Nasara Bay City, a newly reimagined coastal city in South Lombok. Designed as a low-density, nature-integrated mini-city, not a high-rise mega-project. Beachfront living, resort-style amenities, and a master plan built for long-term growth. This is where early vision becomes long-term value.